Thank you very much to both speakers for very informative talks. My question flows on from Joe's point about how do we build solidarity with West Papua. It is interesting to compare the solidarity movement that we did build up with East Timor. And I remember the time, 1999, incredible mass movement occurred at that time. Quite unbelievable, huge rallies to support East Timor, but somehow or other West Papua is not in the same space as far as the people in Australia is concerned. I just wonder how we can, what do you have ideas on how we can actually begin to develop that movement to an understanding about an issue which is just as important and as you've explained, really on a human rights basis is as bad or worse. Thank you.
Although both East Timor and West Papua are very similar, I guess the one difference is that East Timor was on the decolonisation committee. West Papua is recognised by the world as being part of Indonesia, even though it shouldn't be. So being on the decolonisation committee would be great, and I think West Papuans live this life. They dream about answers all the time, and I think they will at some stage try and get back on the decolonisation committee with the support of governments in the Pacific, and hopefully they will achieve that. But also it should be remembered that I guess 5 Australian journalists were killed in East Timor, so that was always an Australian issue that the East Timorese supporters could benefit from. And of course World War II. I mean, Australian troops were in West Papua, but only in the Morocco region in the very south. It was mainly Americans on the West Papuan side, so we don't have the so-called fuzzy angels angle to a certain degree to help West Papua. And during the time of East Timor, I mean, that was always the priority issue. Then there was Bougainville. I mean, I went to many demonstrations and I used to look at the banners and there'd be East Timor, Bougainville, Aceh, and if I was lucky, West Papua would be the last one on the line. And that was part of it. There were other issues of importance. Australia was involved in Bougainville, so West Papua was always the poor cousin, I guess, at the very end. But the thing is, there is improvement. I mean, the Australian government is hopeless, so we can't expect too much from them. The Greens are good supporters of West Papua, and I should say there are individual politicians in all parties that are supportive of West Papua. But I think, and I'm not a huge expert on Facebook and all this type of stuff, but I mean, I'm just amazed at how much Facebook knowledge is going through Facebook pages. The Australia West Papua Facebook page has something like, or set up by one of our supporters, something like 5,000 members. I mean, and this every day there seems to be another Facebook page for West Papua, so it's really taken off, mainly in the Pacific region. But even in Australia, we have a number of groups in Sydney. There's the Australia West Papua Association. We have the Free West Papua Campaign Sydney, and there's quite a few Indigenous people involved in that group, which is terrific. And they're really taking on. In actual fact, I can't remember the dates, but coming up in maybe near the end of October, they've organised a march in Sydney for West Papua, and we passed the information on as soon as I get the dates. I should have brought them with me, and hopefully, if we could get as many people there as possible, that would be terrific. That would be really terrific. So even in Australia, I think it's taken off. There used to be like the Australia West Papua Association and one or two other small groups. Now, in every capital city, there's a support group for West Papua. Not always the Australia West Papua Association, it can be the Free West Papua Campaign, Northern Territorians for Free West Papua. So it is taken off, but we've got to work at it.
Yes, I'd love to just comment on that. That's very good. And it's very true what you said, the huge turnaround in Australia. I remember looking back down George Street at that huge march on September the 11th, it was, 1999, and to see just wall-to-wall people. And of course Melbourne could always, turn on twice as many as Sydney, and that's it. But I don't want to take from that at all. There was a huge what I would call a conversion, and that's what I'm working on this is my last chapter in the whole Girardian concept of conversion in people, not necessarily religious, but a conversion towards the vulnerable other. Now, but I've said I don't take from that at all. It happened, and it was unique, and it was mind-blowing. But it happened in the context of the end of Suharto in 1998, the Asian financial collapse, and the huge appreciation internationally of what happened in Timor. So that those three things sort of allowed, in a sense, they did. I suppose they were part of the cause and effect of what happened in Australia. To my horror, I have read John Howard's book. What do you call it? What's he called it? His autobiography, Lazarus Rising, where and it's the same with all government documents. My thesis is only about documents, only about texts. I haven't done any interviews at all. It's about texts, which is really about what Gerard is talking about. But there is no acknowledgement of the movement in civil society whatsoever. Even in Paul Kelly's book, it might mention a sentence or two. So, but I mean, that's all part of the whole scapegoating process. But regarding West Papua, there haven't been those instances. But what puts the huge responsibility on us, I believe, is that we have had the experience of East Timor. That makes a huge difference to you and me as members of this society. We went into Timor, we hadn't had that before, but we have had it now. And we know that the same people, in fact, in some cases, this very same individuals were doing in Papua, until they've retired, what they did in Timor. Timbal Salayan was the police chief in Timor in 1999, and he was promoted into West Papua, or moved sideways, exactly the same. And we know the CAVR report has the career plans and what happened for 330 officers in that time, where they were promoted in civil society. Like, we've got all that information now. That makes a very big difference to me.
Yeah.
Because we can no longer claim ignorance or that. So Timor has happened to us. Timor has had an effect on Australia, and we must now respond to Papua as a result, I believe.
Okay, last year the Asian Human Rights Commission released The Neglected Genocide, a report on atrocities. In the past half century, the Indonesian security forces have killed as many as 500,000 West Papuans. They concluded that violence wasn't just something that happened in West Papua, it is a form of government. And Jeremy Corbyn, for the leader of the British Labour Party, has come out saying that recognising human rights and justice has to be the cornerstone of foreign policy, the cornerstone of our relationships with every other country, and he's come out fully in support of the West Papuan independence movement. Is it likely that the Australian Labour Party might do something in a similar vein, or is there a problem due to the fact that business interests are exploiting West Papua? I'm thinking of Rio Tinto and other companies that are the various mines that exist there, like the Grasberg mine, the Freeport mine. We have a vested interest in supporting the Indonesian presence in West Papua because it's profitable for us to do so. We give support to the various security forces, the Detachment 88 and Capassus. So is it possible that we can break that material interest, and we're effectively breaking international law? So where does that put Australia in a pariah status?
Okay.
Like international human rights lawyer Jennifer Robertson backs Corbyn with the declaration. It is, of course, unlawful as a matter of international law to recognise an unlawful situation, and Indonesia's occupation of West Papua under the so-called Act of Free Choice is illegal.
Okay.
And one other question: what is the likelihood of internal Indonesian opposition to Indonesia's illegal occupation of West Papua. I'm thinking in terms of the People's Democratic Party, the left-wing People's Democratic Party. What's their stance? Is there a movement within Indonesia that might assist the West Papuans in achieving self-determination?
Thank you very much for all those questions. I just kept thinking as you were talking how so much justice hasn't been done yet to the Indonesian people over what happened in the 1960s. I mean, they're behind the eight ball. I've been accused so often of being anti-Indonesian, nothing further from the truth. Those poor people haven't had justice either, you know. But I can't. The question about, you know, whether it's going to happen. And I don't want to be depressive, but in a sense I am depressive about this. I just feel Australia is so much enthralled to Indonesia over everything that Labor, Liberal, whoever, we've never ever stood up to them. We've never stood up to them. We just haven't got the... You know, Alan Renouf once said, you know, he was the head of Foreign Department, he said, Australians have been a frightened and intimidated people. Isn't it horrible to say? I hate it. He wrote a book called A Frightened Country. David Walker's book, Anxious Nation. Like we're so worried about Indonesia, and you know, I can't answer your question, but I think that is a very important element in it, our fear of Indonesia.
I don't think it's about our interests, economic interests in any of the companies we might be involved in over there, and it's more to do with having a stable region to our north. The whole island of New Guinea will always be strategically important to Australia. They still have a mindset that if we're ever going to be invaded, it will come down from the north. I mean, once upon a time it was going to be the Asian hordes. I think Japan shocked Australia so much when they bombed down, and that the mindset was we have to have a stable region to our north. And at the time they were nearly going to back the Dutch at one stage against Indonesia. But once the US decided they would back Jakarta, well, Australia usually followed suit. But the whole Australian policy is basically have a stable region to our north. We don't want to see a balkanisation of Indonesia and have 7 or 8 small states up there that we have to fund and look after. So it's more strategic in a way. And no, both Liberal and Labour. I've written letters to both Prime Minister, both sides, and Foreign Ministers, and you'll always get in your letter somewhere, we recognise Indonesian sovereignty over West Papua, and it's going to remain like that until the week before West Papua becomes independent. And but that's not taken away from individual politicians and all parties that are concerned. But we cannot. It's not just economic interests; it's more to do with strategic interests.
Just commenting on what you said, Susan, what the Papuans say, ask us. I think that is right. And I think it's actually very similar in a lot of ways to what's happening in an Indigenous Australia. Ask us what's going on, ask us about our education and our languages. And I'll tell you, when I've tried to sort of tackle Indonesians about this, you know, the fact that the mortality in Papua is 63 as opposed to ordinary Indonesians is 73, and they say, what's Australian Indigenous mortality? And it's exactly the same. So I think we are taking a leaf from the Pacific Islands who are moving on it, you know, in a more forthright manner than we are. And the Kuris, you know, they've had Papuans talking on Kuri radio and...
Yes, I agree,
yeah.
Anne. To listen to what they say, I mean, we're so good at telling all these people how they should do it, but having listened to tell the story, see, it's the... You know, I knew nothing about West Papua much. It was because of Timor. Like, you don't read it in the paper. There's important things in the paper besides some people who made the front page 3 days running. There are important issues. I mean, everybody's tied up with it. But if the story's not told, to listen and then tell. So I don't know, social media, I suppose.
My question, 2 questions. One is what Amnesty International is saying about the situation. That's one thing. And second, as you were saying, that so much, basically genocide is happening, so much population have been killed, murdered and whatever. I I would expect that among the Indonesian police or whatever, there be some people who dissent, who say this is inhuman or whatever. I mean, we are living in 21st century. I'm surprised that they are just willingly, like Nazis under Hitler, doing those things. So, anybody know something about it?
Amnesty International does raise, of course, concerns about the human rights abuses. They, on the yearly report, they always mention about West Papua and document cases, urgent actions, etc. But they have no, obviously, they have no stand on if West Papua should be independent or not. That's not their job. To the military, and again, of course, it's not to do with it being anti-Indonesian, but West Papuans are seen a bit. I don't like to use the word primitive, but there's a lot of racism goes on in Indonesia against West Papuans, as fuzzy hair. They in the mainstream Indonesian press, you do still see like Stone Age people. Susan mentioned about the West Papuan women, like in the markets in Jayapura. The migrants from other parts of the archipelago will be inside undercover selling their wares, whereas the poor old West Papuan women are all around the edge, outside, in the hot sun or the rain. So it's this sort of discrimination that goes on. Anybody that knows about the Indonesian military in East Timor should not be surprised that they commit human rights abuses in West Papua. They do. And they're because of the interest in resource extraction, they actually have created a false OPM. Because if nothing is going on, they'll actually hire people to shoot at some of their, soldiers, so that then they can have a military operation to destroy villages, destroy market gardens, kill animals, and it's all to keep the West Papua totally in fear. So they can basically get on. They used to only get 30% of the budget from the government. They had to raise this 70% themselves, and that seems to me to be part of the military in West Papua fundraising for their operations. That their funding has been increased, but I couldn't find any figures how much it has been too. But of course, not every Indonesian soldier is a Nazi. There are probably genuine soldiers, but they're occupied. And if you're going to actually commit human rights abuses, you always have to feel that the people you're occupying are going to kill and are a bit subhuman in a way. So, and that's the only way you can do it. And unfortunately, a lot of Indonesian soldiers think the West Papuans are still primitive, Stone Age.
Yes, and I know that that's true. And of course, regarding Timor, they were all brainwashed into believing they were communists. That was the big thing, that they were communists. I don't know whether any Indonesian soldiers have stood out against it in Papua, but I certainly know of at least one in East Timor who was told to kill some people. This was in 1999, and he took off his shirt and he put his arms out and he said to his other fellow soldiers, "You'll have to kill me first." Now that was an Indonesian soldier who just, but now look, I wonder, can I just pick up on something else that you said, thank you, and that is about the word genocide. And look, I'm just talking here among friends. I have a real problem with the word genocide just used blandly without any modifier about Papua. And I've unfortunately, a friendship I had with somebody has broken over this. And look, I just get really worried. You didn't, I'm not saying you did, but, and Peter King's thing was like had genocide with a question mark, or slow motion genocide. I think this is quite fine. But to just blandly say genocide can really shoot the whole thing in the foot. Because you say to an ordinary person, you say genocide, they're thinking, well, where are the piles of bodies? Now you can say 500,000 have died, which is true, and you're looking at it and it's a concerted effort to Indonesianise that population. But do you know what I'm saying about just to the ordinary everyday person? you're talking about genocide there. They don't see any evidence of the piles of bodies, and they think, oh, they're just saying this, you know, they're just trying to make it, you know, say the worst word possible. I just don't think it does any. I don't know what you think about that, Stuart.
It's a good question. I mean, the issue for me is about how do you communicate with the people who want to understand but admit they don't know too much. And there's a process you have to. It's a bit like my work over Palestine. You have to. I mean, there has been a sea change eventually to understand the tragedy of the Palestinian people. Without and there are certainly genocidal characteristics to what has gone on there. But we've had to take people in terms of communication. We've had to use, for example, another good question from you was about whether any soldiers or police would break ranks. Well, one of the crucial groups willing to talk about genocide in Israel is a group of soldiers called Breaking the Silence, who've had the guts to come out and say, we've been murdering indigenous people. We have been committing crimes against humanity, and it needs that kind of empirical grounding to go the next step in communication about these tragedies. Okay, that's enough from the chair, because I'm breaking the rules about the chair. Question.
So thank you very much, Joe and Susan, for your contributions tonight. It's really fresh. My question is about the Pacific Island Forum. What role does Australia play in that? And what's the Australian government's reaction to the position now taken at the Pacific Islands Forum? Thanks.
The Pacific Island Forum is, of course, made up of the 16 independent countries in the Pacific, and Australia and New Zealand are part of the Pacific Island Forum. Australia basically tries to stop West Papua getting any traction at the Pacific Island Forum, or it has in the past. I mean, I remember reading one article of a journalist that had attended a past Pacific Island Forum, and he said Prime Minister Harris spent half a day running around telling everybody not to mention West Papua, and that's basically Australia would still prefer that West Papua is not mentioned at all. But I did get up last year at the Pacific Island Forum, and I think that's because of the leaders in the Pacific actually began to listen to their people. Probably a bit unusual, but they actually did. They could see the groundswell was happening, and I thought, well, maybe we better get West Papua back on the agenda and might get the boot. So, but again, it's hopeful maybe that this time, with the Pacific Island Forum, we've written to actually DFAT about raising that Australia should back the PIF fact-finding mission and ask encourage Jakarta to accept it, but they never really replied clearly enough to sort of say what their policy was. They just keep saying we raised the human rights situation. I've got a feeling the Pacific Island Forum will start making headway, not because of, but it'll be more because Australia will take a neutral position, and it's actually Australia's interest to back the Pacific Island Forum, because at least then they're not going to have a hiccup in Indonesia of saying this is an Australian initiative. It's actually coming from a whole series of nations in the Pacific, so it might be a good way for Australia to sort of do something about West Papua but not looking like it's coming from them. But I'm hopeful the Pacific Island Forum will do so. Will get the fact-finding mission.
Mary Morrissey, I was wondering who will be our delegate to the Pacific Island Forum in October?
Sorry, the Pacific Island Forum is actually happening right now. The meeting in October in Vanuatu is the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and Australia is not a member of the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and it's probably just as well or not. But there's another organisation, the Pacific Island Development Forum, which is the Fijian Prime Minister Bainimarama organised, because he was sick and tired of Australia and New Zealand at the Pacific Island Forum telling everybody what to do. So he started the PIDF without Australia and New Zealand involvement, saying that we were such counterproductive to the Pacific Island Forum that he would start a new organisation. And that's where the new subgroup has come out of that, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, a coalition of support for West Papua. So even Fiji and Prime Ministers can be helpful.
Australia's behaviour, for example, in the Security Council, is usually to vote with America on issues like this, America or Israel, to abstain or to vote for human rights. And on Palestine, for example, it wasn't until the intervention of Bob Carr that the Labour government found the courage to abstain. It was regarded as an enormous gesture that we found the courage to abstain. So in terms of the capturing the minds of the leaders, it seems we have to move from complete opposition to, putting their big toe in the water and calling it courageous abstention before we get to downright opposition. I mean, and I don't subscribe to the great person theory of history, but clearly we need a mover and shaker like Susan or Joe in the Parliament to take on the West Papuan cause in the way that, to his credit, Carr has taken on the Palestinian issue.
What's the role of churches there? In many places, churches take the side of the oppressed population and gives them some help.
Yes, I'm thinking about the churches in Timor's time, like we were really very slow and very compromised. But anyway, look, of the Christians in West Papua, 30% are Catholic and 70% are Protestant. There are huge Protestant churches that are very strongly for independence. Pastor Benny Guillet, it was such a privilege to meet him at the King Me Church in Jayapura. And now and the Catholics are mainly in the south. Merauke is a very Catholic area. Okay. Now, two things have happened this year which have given me huge heart, and didn't make the news, didn't even make the Catholic Weekly. Oh my goodness gracious! Not that I saw. I don't really read it often, but I must do it more often. But I heard this. I could not believe it. Bishops, Catholic bishops, have their conferences. There's the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, and it's an important part of the, business. Well, there's the Pacific Bishops' Conference. They held their Pacific Bishops' Conference in West Papua this year. 23 bishops from the Pacific went there. Now, it had a few little problems because the ordinary people weren't told, actually, and they just found out about it overnight. But they managed to get letters into the hands of some of the bishops. Now, that was good. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, but since then, the executive of the Bishops' Conference of Oceania met and put out an enormously strong statement, including calling on the Australian government to do something a bit better about the people on Manus Island and Nauru, but also supporting the ULMWP's bid for membership of the Melanesian Spearhead Group. And two of those bishops, there were 8 bishops altogether, 2 from Australia, Bishop Long, the new Vietnamese bishop in Parramatta, and Bishop Bob McGuckin from Toowoomba, and the New Zealand bishops as well. So I look on those two events as rather strikingly good, and I hope that type of thing continues. But look, the little prayer is to help people to understand, to get it out. Half the people in my church would never have heard of West Papua,
I'd just like to ask you, what is the demand? You said the Papuan population is down to 49%. It doesn't seem like they've got much future left to become independent and in charge of their own country. Is there any unifying demand?
Well, the West Papuan people are calling on Jakarta to have dialogue with them, but basically Jakarta's not interested in dialoguing with the West Papuan leaders. But they are fearful of the internationalisation of the issue, and really concerned about the headway the United Liberation Movement for West Papua is making in the Pacific region. So it will probably be out of fear that Jakarta is ready to lose West Papua, that they will actually begin to dialogue with the West Papuans. And for all the talk about autonomy or as a way forward. I mean, West Papuans only want one thing really, the majority, and that's independence. I mean, I've been to quite a few conferences with West Papuans, and they'll speak openly about human rights abuses and all that. They probably won't mention independence, but if you go up to them later on a one-to-one person, it's always about independence, and they are becoming the minority. But just because you're just below 50%, I think headway can still be made. I mean, that's just I'm being a bit optimistic, maybe, I'm not sure, but I'm just so encouraged. I mean, look, during the Suharto period, I thought, when President Suharto was in, I thought, no way will West Papua become independent. But I've been so encouraged by the headway the West Papuans are making the last 2 years. I'm actually I think they will, I really do. It's just, if you sort of follow the issue, it's really just boom. And I mean, there's many ways forward for them, through the MSG, the Pacific Island Forum, the new coalition in the Pacific for West Papua. Benny Wenda has a huge support, not just in the UK, he's a West Papuan leader in the UK, and he's got followers all around the world. There's international parliamentarians for West Papua that he started, so there's a lot of parliamentarians around the world of sign-on, and international lawyers for West Papua. So it's all happening, but I guess, and where the breakthrough will come, I don't really know, but I'm sure it will happen.
Terrific.
Look, I think the issue for us is whether there's going to be a groundswell of interest and support and demand within a better informed Australian public. As something we have a responsibility for. We know, for example, there's been a huge sea change in understanding and attitudes about Israel-Palestine. It's shifted very considerably because of the groundswell, and we can't just rely on half a dozen main movers and shakers, in particular people like Joe and Susan. I mean, I hope that what you've talked about tonight can be published, for example, in New Matilda. We need, because it's quite obvious that social media like that, if you write a substantial piece, it goes wildfire, literally around the world. You get, I mean, amazed at how much feedback you get. That's really a cue for me to, on your behalf, to thank Joe and Susan, not only for their presentations tonight, but for the work you're doing on behalf of the West Papuan people.